I'm David Pinsoff,
I'm David Pietrzewski.
and this is Evolutionary Psychology, the podcast, where actual evolutionary psychology.
Is being done by actual evolutionary psychologists. David, today we are talking about love.
Yes, love and the propaganda of love,
Mm.
and regrets about love, disappointments,
Mm.
really all the emotions that the human is capable of experiencing are felt in the context of love or a loving relationship or the end of a loving relationship. This was a really sweeping, vast conversation where we covered all these topics and more with a really fun guest. And who is that guest, Dave?
Cari Goetz.
Cari Goetz. Whatever Cari wants, Cari gets. She made that joke.
Yeah, it's a good reminder of how to pronounce her last name,
Yes, it
which
is a
I always
good.
need. Yeah.
Yeah, but this was such a fun conversation. It's my favorite type of conversation where we get to just, talk about whatever topic catches our fancy in the moment, and sort of discover new insights and ideas while the conversation is happening. And so I think you'll have a fun time listening to this
Yeah, I
conversation.
don't think you'll regret or be disappointed, and you might love the episode.
Yes, all of the above. All right,
Enjoy.
enjoy.
Okay, I found the record button. Today we have Cari Goetz, who is a professor at Cal State San
Bernardino.
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 Uh, I had it on the tip of my tongue, but I wanted to make sure. Um,
There's a lot of Cal State campuses. It's okay.
yeah, how big is that campus?
Oh, we have about 18 to 20,000 students, sort
Okay,
of depending on what enrollment
yeah.
looks like. So we're kind of mid-size. We're not one of the big giant campuses. So like Cal State Fullerton, those are closer to UC size. Cal State Long Beach, I think those are like 40, 50. But then there's some much smaller Cal State campuses. So we're kind of in the middle.
We can cut all this out. UCSB is smaller than Fullerton, I think, by a lot,
Oh,
actually.
really?
Yeah, Fullerton's huge.
Yeah, Fullerton's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. How big is UCLA, David? You know?
I have no idea.
It's at least
Yeah.
it's at least one. um, so we are here on a podcast about evolutionary psychology, so I guess we should start talking about that.
I guess.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
guess. What is that thing? What is that anyway? I don't know.
I want to actually, Carrie, you can choose. There's two options for you. So choose your own adventure. Either your research or mating psychology and its state in EvPsych.
Oh, I mean, we can weave between them.
Yeah.
But I like the bigger picture starting point, the,
Okay.
mating psychology, and it's,
Yeah. Let
yeah.
me let me let me tee this up a little bit, and then you can completely reject it like a politician if you want, and answer the
Okay.
question you wish you had been asked, which is, we had Dan Conroy Beam on, and he's really there hasn't been a lot of mating people on this, and I think a lot of people when they come to EvPsych, they come about it through the mating stuff, especially if they take it like an undergrad class. And I think a lot of people who are outside of EvPsych think about the mating stuff. And if you look online, you see a lot of stuff about mating. Um,
And if you hear other people talking about evolutionary psychology, it's often about mating and
right.
Yes.
outside of the field.
Yeah, what is your take on that, either sort of socially or scientifically? And what's your take on it in terms of like, is that good for the science? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah. My thoughts on this question, I think, go back and forth all the time. There's times when I think we can really highlight the contributions, right? That research on human mating from an evolutionary perspective have made, in general to psychological science, and understanding of human nature and human behavior and cognition. And then also for getting evolutionary psychology out there as a perspective and an important approach that people can be taking to these questions. But then, there's the flip side of that. It's in some ways it's to our own detriment. It's in many ways because the questions of human mating are in some way the first introduction or sometimes sort of the poster child for evolutionary psychology, it is seen as that's what evolutionary psychology is. It is these questions about human mating, many of them that have are about hypothesizing about and demonstrating sex differences, and that the field for many people is that, or their perception of the field is that. And even when I teach, right, I actually, as I've gone on through time, have tried to structure my classes to really just de-emphasize that work. And it's because I'm taking the perspective of thinking about evolutionary psychology as, all the different types of questions it can answer, and thinking about human nature in totality and all the different domains, there is research in. But if I was taking the perspective of trying to teach students about sort of like the research into evolutionary psychology proportionally, right? If I was going to spend the same proportion in class as the proportion of published literature, right? Then yeah, we might spend 50% of the time on mating studies because there's just a lot of studies out there that focus on that. And I think it also, I've talked a lot.
You can
It is
talk
me.
as much as you want. I mean,
It's the ways to our own detriment, right? Is that I think we're because it's the focus there. We don't. There's so many other important questions that evolutionary psychologists are working on that aren't in that domain, and they aren't seen or understood or known as part of this discipline and part of this perspective. And that's one of the issues.
yeah.
I think also because it's so, those findings, some of them can be flashy or eye-catching. They can
Yeah.
be easily misinterpreted. They can be then, I think, used by people in ways that aren't necessarily what the researcher was intending or what the researcher would have concluded from their own research. And that causes another problem for us. Our EPPR problem in many cases comes, I think, from mating research, right? So I'm a mating researcher. It's what I do, right? I'm trying to answer these questions, but at the same time, I very much recognize, I think, some of the problems it's caused for us as a science.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be inclined to agree with everything you said. I think in addition to the overemphasis on mating in general, even within the category of mating, I feel like there's a lopsided focus on certain topics to the detriment of other topics. So within the field of mating psychology, I think there's an overemphasis on research on sex differences, and in particular research on attraction and on the early stages of a relationship, as opposed to the long middle part of a relationship and all of the cooperative dynamics and conflicts that might arise, and maintaining a relationship, which is really hard, deciding whether you want to stay in it or leave it, eventually, rearing offspring, which is the ultimate purpose for our relationships. There's very little research on parenting, despite its outsized impact on our fitness. And so I think even within the field of mating psychology, there's a lopsided focus that's not quite encompassing the full human experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and everywhere in psychology, there's criticisms of our, especially in psychology, right? That we, study undergrads, right? But I think this is a
Yeah.
particular issue for mating research, right? Especially the undergrads we study. If a lot of research is coming from very traditional undergraduates, so we've
Yeah.
got a mean age of 20, and they don't have kids,
Hmm.
and they're away from home and making these decisions with no input from anybody. What the outputs of those decisions, right? They tell us something, right? They absolutely tell us something, right? That is valuable data. But the extent to which we've then backtracked that to say, well, oh, this is, telling us these specific things about human nature, is a little questionable, because we haven't captured a bunch of this other stuff related to human mating, and stuff that probably would have described the mating lives of most people through humanity. They most of the time when making mating decisions, they probably already would have had kids.
Yeah.
They, would be going, navigating, staying or leaving a relationship or finding a new partner after death or splitting up, or all these different sorts of things later in life, that aren't captured by many of our studies on mating and attraction, even the ones on attraction and the ones on preferences and the ones that are on sex differences that we have, don't get at all of that stuff that you just talked about, which, if we're thinking about mating across a lifetime, a larger proportion of your mating decisions would have been made in those contexts. And we aren't studying those as much as we could be.
Yeah, I think those are hard to study too. I mean, I was just
Yeah.
for a completely different reason. It's so funny if you poke on anything, like everything, the whole universe is in mating psychology. Like the whole
Yeah.
problem with, as we've talked about in other episodes, and David, I think you mentioned this, is that if you count publications, and that's your criteria for people sort of being good scientists, then you just get what's easy to measure. And what's the easiest thing to measure. You don't go out and actually measure like real world families or things, right? Unless you're an anthropologist. So you have undergrads. You're also, I mean, the other thing too is you're also the consumers of our science are also undergrads. So it's even worse because we're not teaching 40-year-olds or 80-year-olds. We're not studying 40-year-olds and 80-year-olds. We're both studying, but also teaching early, like late teenagers and early 20-year-olds who are kind of weird in that they're not parents yet because of our very, very late altricial, or, we're altricial to very late in this culture. And so, yeah, I think it's an example of, it's a combination of where our science happens to be done that we're teaching and around these younger kids, but it's also, I think, a problem of, if you have to just collect a lot of data and crank out a lot of papers, then yeah, you're not going to be going far afield from who's just down the hall, basically.
Absolutely. The incentive structures of our science play a role here. Because yeah, that these other types of things, it's hard data to get, and it's complicated. All of those different pieces, right? If you can have it, isolated down to these folks who don't vary a lot on certain dimensions, right? Yeah, you can get at certain things more purely, but that not varying on those other dimensions might really matter.
Yeah.
But on the plus side, right? So this is one of the great things about, evolutionary social sciences, is that we aren't just the, psychologists here studying undergrads, right? So I think about the work from, Brooke Shelza and like Elizabeth Pillsworth and people who I think about as part of our broader evolutionary social science community who look at these similar questions in folks who are very different than the ones that I am often studying.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of the power of our field, is that is part of it. I think when I teach undergrads, it's one of the, I teach an evolutionary psychology class in a psychology department in a psychology major. It's mostly psych majors taking the class. And trying to explain to them, like, well, we're called evolutionary psychology, but to me, this evidence from this anthropologist in this study is more informative in my work and speaks more and is more similar to what I do than this research that came from this other person who's also called a psychologist who's studying attraction or something, right? From a
Right.
social psychology perspective or something. And trying to get that across about how I see that as part of my discipline, right, is, I think, unique for them. I think that's different than what they see in some of the other classes that they'll take.
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, I study undergrads, you study undergrads, David, I don't know. Do you study undergrad?
Yeah, occasionally, I
Or
guess.
you're checking. No, I mean, I don't mean like, I
Yeah.
just mean, I think you're typical participants of that.
Yeah.
And I think like it's also easy because we're academics and we like to self-flagellate. Like and as you said, Cari, there's a lot of really important work done in insights on undergraduate or 20-year-old or early mating psychology, and that just wouldn't exist without this approach. And so I don't think we should throw that baby out with the bathwater either, for sure. And I think we should be very proud of that. And maybe this is getting into a little bit of your research, but what you mentioned, this thing that this anthropologist studied. What, to your mind, is sort of the core baby of the, and not the bathwater, of the mating literature? And sort of, if you could wave a magic wand and sort of have people actually understand what it is that you're trying to do in the mating research. What is that? Is it, for example, that it's not just flashy effects, but it's actually sort of design mindedness, or that kind of thing. Like, what do you think people aren't getting? And if you could just sort of like pick them up by the scruff of the collar and be like, you stupid YouTube podcaster, don't do this, do this other thing. What's that other thing they should be doing? If they're
Yeah.
listening, which they're probably
Um,
not, but maybe they're listening. So tell them
it,
what to do.
um, it's certainly it's the design mindedness. It's at the heart of it, thinking of the mind as this collection of adaptations, right? And that these decisions, or the outputs that we observe, right? The feelings we feel, the things we're attracted to, the motivations we might experience, right? In the mating realm, but of course in all the other realms, but at least in the mating realm, which are really important to us. We spend a lot of time thinking about these things and talking about these things to each other, about who we're interested in, and what we like, and our relationships and how we feel about them. Those occupy a lot of our conscious thought, right? And so it's so important for that reason, because it occupies so much of our conscious thought. But I think the biggest thing, when I teach a lot of this stuff for students, and when I talk about it in my research, is how much of what is happening under the hood to result in that stuff that we're conscious of is stuff that we're not consciously aware of, right?
Yeah.
That we don't have, and we're designed probably to not have good access to what's the information that we're actually taking in, and how that information is being weighted or toggled, or used by our mind to then produce that outward feeling of, oh, I think that person's hot, right? Or, oh, I don't want to, that's not the kind of person that I would want to be with. And what's actually going on under there is stuff that we don't have access to. And we might slap explanations on top of it. Oh, I like this person for this reason, right? But those are explanations that might not map on to the actual functional reality of what is leading to the desire, right? And I think communicating that, and helping people understand that, I think is probably one of the most important things for our mating research, because a lot of the misconceptions come from the idea that if we're arguing there's some sex difference for functional reasons, it's that people have conscious access to that functional reason, and then they're consciously doing that for that functional reason, right? And I
Mhm.
think that's a lot of where the misinformation and misconceptions about mating research in evolutionary psychology come from, not appreciating that distinction.
Mm. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is there's really two things that EvPsych has done. Number one is it's provided data or knowledge about something people care about a lot, which is mating. And that really was very absent, right, from the literature. I mean, it's sort of, there's this trope that a lot of people want to go into psychology and they read a textbook and they think it's going to be about jealousy and, lust and disappointment and envy and jealousy, and it's starting to be, but it's usually about like perception. No offense to perception, but
Right.
it's about perception and reasoning and logic, and you're like, where is my experience as a human being? And I think like one of the things I'm hearing you say is like the one of the really important things has been to study that stuff, but not in a way that's just sort of like cataloging people's experiences, but genuinely a science of, here are actual evolved systems and mechanisms in a way to sort of study this stuff. But then the other thing you're saying is that um, this thing that most of us go through when we're trained, which is to really, and it's a multi-year process, it was for me, is to understand that the way we naturally think about ourselves, which is sort of like there's a little person in the head and we consciously sort of make our decisions, and maybe there's some non-conscious effects that sort of make me want to have a piece of chocolate, or say, oh, I should sleep with this person even though I don't want to, those little things poking on the little person in us. But otherwise, that's sort of the model. And the thing that we get trained out of is that no, all of us is a mechanical system. There's a software level description of you and I and the little person in our head. And then just as you said, then therefore, when we're talking about why the evolved psychology of mating is the way it is. We're not talking about it being inevitable. We're not talking about being conscious or not. We're just saying like this is the way it works, and it's sort of we're agnostic as to whether or not, or we might have a principal reason to suspect people aren't aware of it. So it's a very different sort of way of thinking. And if you don't have that way of thinking, then it sounds like people might sort of blame people for the way that they're built, or I don't know what do you think is the consequence of thinking it's conscious? Is that what?
There's blame people for the way they're built. There's also the attaching sort of to the extent that there's so let's say it's sex differences in mate preferences. We'll pick the big one. Right? That oh, okay, that if men place a greater premium on physical attractiveness, well, then they're just shallow, right?
Right,
Or if women place a greater premium on resources, well, then they're a bunch of gold diggers, right?
right,
So it's that sort of um, value judgment, I guess, that is applied to some of that because the thinking behind those preferences is, oh, that you're consciously conniving about those, right? Oh, well, I need this or I want that,
yeah,
for these reasons, right? And that's what then leads to that kind of value judgment about those differences. And that's
right,
just a sex difference. It's the big sex differences example, but you could think of a lot of this for lots of mating psychology in the world of jealousy, right? In the world of, anything, right, that we might think about. That it allows for that, as opposed to if you're having that more complex way of thinking about it, you can appreciate when there's those differences or when we might predict people will feel a certain way or another way without needing to then attach that value judgment to it.
mm,
Yeah.
It's interesting. I certainly buy this logic that there's a lot of instinct blindness, where we're not fully aware of all of the complex computations that are going on underneath the hood before we even feel something like attraction or jealousy. But it seems to me that there's a disconnect between other forms of instinct blindness and the instinct blindness related to mating. So if I'm talking
yeah,
about, say, perception or proprioception or the way I balance, you could really delve into all the complex computations in my vestibular system and really blow my mind about all the complexity there. And I'm totally not aware of it. I'm just walking around and effortlessly balancing, but there are like these hundreds of tiny computers in my head that are just registering my position in space, and it's amazing. And when you tell me that, I'm not going to feel threatened or uncomfortable, right? I might even be interested. But as soon as you start to get under the hood of my attractions, my mating psychology, then
right,
all of a sudden there is a sense of threat there. Because there, it's not merely that we don't have access to it, it's that we often have strategic reasons to actually conceal it. Because mating is a zero-sum game. If two people mate with each other, those people are not available to be mated with to other people. And so because of this zero-sumness and this competitiveness and this rivalry in the mating domain, and also even within partners, there's the temptation to defect in the prisoner's dilemma, to, take advantage of the other party's investment. So there are all these potential conflicts, and you may not want to disclose your attractions, or if you're, attracted to someone else, if you're in a relationship, or what it is about the person that attracted you to them that could be threatening. If it's something that, is not going to last a long time, you might not want to disclose that to the person. You might want to make them think that you're going to be in it for the long haul, when you might not be. And so because of there are all these sort of undesirable or strategic things that are happening under the hood, when you start to poke at them and reveal them, people get really uncomfortable. And so I'm wondering if you buy that logic that there's more to conceal in the mating domain than there is in, say, proprioception. And if that's maybe underlying some of this reaction to evolutionary psychology.
I think you're right. That sounds right to me. Certainly, and that's true for any psychology that's regulating sort of cooperative relationships in general,
Yeah.
right? More so than right. If you're thinking proprioception or some of those basic perception things, the calculus my mind is doing to catch a ball, right? Like,
Yeah.
cool, my mind's doing calculus, sweet, right? But
yeah,
there's
Yeah.
no threat there. Versus, oh, you ignored that person. Oh, well, that's because, they had already offended somebody. I'm pretty sure they were an offensive person and that's why I ignored them, not because there's some calculation going on that it would not benefit me to interact with that person. And right?
Yeah.
So there's the broader any type of cooperative relationship. I think this statement is true for, but then mating relationships are, like the ultimate cooperative relationship. And there's some thinking I've been doing along those lines lately of like that dimension of cooperative relationships and really thinking a lot about mating relationships as that, because they've got the extra layers of shared investments if there's offspring, right? And
Yeah.
in our modern environment, especially all the other shared investments that happen in mating relationships, right? These resource
Yeah.
investments that are incredibly costly, buying a house together, right? You're doing all these
Yeah.
things that you're so intertwined. But yeah, and so especially in those relationships, right, that the extent to which there would be motivation to do anything that would be beneficial to you but costly to the other person, right? It needs to be hidden, right? It benefits you for it to be hidden, and to them, and then maybe to yourself also. And so the layers of explanation that you might have that you have conscious access to, help protect that, right? And yes, the suggestion then that there is that stuff under the hood, that is providing is that functional layer, is threatening, right? Because if that gets revealed, right, or if I start to have knowledge of it and I start to then question, well, what are my own motives, right? How much
Yeah.
might that bleed through? And
Right.
what does that say then about how I can represent myself as a person, right? And
Yeah.
my thoughts about the kind of person I am. And so yeah, I your thoughts make sense to me, right? That's could be what's going on
Right.
here. I don't know that I've seen anybody write it that way. That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, can I further? So this is something I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about in what circumstances deception can be mutually beneficial to both the deceiver and the deceived. And it seems to me that romantic relationships might be one such case where something that is not quite true can nevertheless be beneficial for both parties to believe. So if someone's mate value, if a big part of a person's mate value is how committed they are to you, if how much they're into you and how much they're committed to you for the long haul, and then that means that if I falsely broadcast a huge amount of commitment, that could increase your commitment to me and thereby increase your mate value to me. And you can get into kind of a positive feedback loop there where you can start out with a lie like I can say falsely that you're the most beautiful person in the world. Everyone else is hideous by comparison. There's just something uniquely about you that no one could ever replace. And I'm going to be with you until the end of time, no matter what happens, even if you become physically deformed or if you lose all your money, whatever. And we say these things, and they're false to a certain extent. Like our mating psychology is more strategic than that. Um, but because they create this positive feedback loop, where it causes you to increase your commitment to me, which causes me to increase my commitment to you, which causes you to increase your commitment to me, we can sort of get into a symbiotic myth together.
Mhm.
And if we work together to build that myth, it actually does, strengthen our relationship. And so there's something kind of paradoxical about, commitment, where you kind of have to fake it till you make it,
Yep.
or at least there might be like a kernel of delusion at the heart of love. And it may be that once we start to get under the hood of that delusion, it can be threatening.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting, data on things like arranged marriages,
Yeah.
where, it's explicit that this commitment has been made prior to there being sort of these ideas of love, right?
Yeah.
Or those feelings there. But people have, they've made that decision that this is where I'm doing this investment,
Hmm.
right? And then you see, right, if you look at the data on that, there's plenty of those marriages that end up quite, successful and happy, right? There's
Yeah.
ones that don't, right? But and the process you're talking about here, it's a very kind of explicit version of that, right? It's like we've decided that we're making this commitment, we're going to do this investment, and then that builds from there, which is, the opposite direction from, I think, what many, folks sort of in the ontogeny we all developed in, right? Think of it as the, falling in love with somebody first and then making those commitments.
Hmm.
But I think the fake it till you make it idea, and you know, I get the feeling from some people I've talked to in sort of the relationships counseling world who are not evolutionarily informed really, but some of this is the sort of things that they recommend to couples when they are struggling, right? That it is, even if you're not feeling, you still need, doing these things for your partner, right? Having that time and doing those committed things because it does that, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think you're right there that deception about on both ends, right? It can be beneficial to
Yeah.
build, create that cycle.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I love that idea that about Carrie, what you said about this super highly cooperative thing, and David, this thing about we sort of turn off our skepticism or our usual criticisms. There's Marvin Minsky had this book after the Society of Mind, which was not nearly as well received, and some of it was sort of out of his wheelhouse. He talked about things that, like in development, that I don't think are true, but there's some really good insights about it. It was his last book before he passed away, and one of it is about love. And his argument is that if you actually look at what a lot of people describe when they talk about being in love, it's sort of like there's nobody, I can't think of anyone else other than you. I can't think of anything other than you. And his argument is a lot of it is sort of actually negatively framed, where he's basically describing it as the usual critics in our head of sort of like this person's annoying. What
Hmm.
else can I be doing with my time? Like there's nothing I'd rather be doing than spend time with you. I can't think of anyone other than you. It's this sort of super signal of the usual sort of cost benefit transactional analysis I have with the world. I am pointing to you through this evolved commitment device's output and saying the usual things of like, I'm going to think about other stuff, I'm going to do other stuff, I'm going to even consider other stuff is all turned off. There's nothing I can think about other than you. I can't imagine doing anything other than you. I never want to be any with anyone other than you. Like it's this beautiful readout of this just turning off all of the usual sort of cost benefit things. So it really reminded me, David, of what you were saying.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I buy that a lot. And it is romantic to turn off those cost benefit things, and signaling that you've turned off your cost benefit calculators in your brain to your mate can increase their commitment to you, which increases your commitment to them. And yeah, I think that's a big part of what love is and how you build commitment with someone is, it's a two-way street, and sometimes you gotta just get into a positive feedback loop, even if it's founded on something that's not quite true, or more of a romantic myth, but still it can lead to something that becomes real.
Mhm.
It might be true too. I mean, you can
Maybe,
also just
yeah.
imagine, like, from a very alien and cynical perspective, you might just imagine you're sort of like, look, we have this organism and it can't stand the other organisms that's around because, like it's just been designed to sort of like maximize its own benefits. But
Mhm.
we have to get like two organisms together for long enough to like, successfully produce and raise children. What are the things that, I mean, we know this for disgust, for example, right? Like one of the things about sexual, and Carrie, you probably know much more about the primary literature than this, but just anecdotally, or people always talk about in classes that when lust is turned on or whatever, what is the technical term for lust? What would that be? Sexual arousal?
Arousal.
Arousal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Disgust is turned down. Like even the Deb Lieberman work, like if you're attracted to somebody, you're not as disgusted, right?
Mhm.
And that's clearly like the usual, like, well, that's just disgusting to like, be around somebody or like deal with them. Those things get turned down in order to, make kids. That makes sense. And so the idea is that sort of just that same design principle, but then applied to lots of stuff, which is just like if you're around somebody for a long time, is it generally annoying? And maybe what love is, this Minsky idea, is it's good reasons to turn down the things that would ordinarily bother you. And it's probably the same thing for love for your kid too, right? Like we're all parents. I mean, the things that my son does, if another person did it, it would just drive me crazy. And it's tolerable, and I love my son to death. But it's just that threshold just really gets down regulated. So this idea that love is changing thresholds on sort of what's intolerable, I think is a really interesting idea that I've not really seen much literature on.
Yeah. You're making me think of, so there's the piece of it for so it was a couple things you were both saying, but I don't know if anybody's sort of empirically demonstrated if we looked at sort of statements or things people say that they think convey, that love and commitment, right? If the ones that do it the best are the ones that really do indicate exactly what you're saying, that you are foregoing other things
Mm.
or for giving up other options or not interested in those other things and other like fixed beneficial things, right? But for you, right? And if that then those are perceived as particularly indicative of particularly romantic, right? I mean that
Mm.
it might feel that way, right?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And some of that too, it's it's interesting with that kind of love commitment device kind of idea. A big thing that matters is your alternatives, right? So it's this, and this is something people don't like to think about with the under the hood stuff, right? That, as much as it's, there is that shared investment you have with this person that's built this relationship, right? It is likely that we also, have a sense of what our alternatives are, right? And that is stored and toggled away somewhere, right? And in many cases, it is not worth, right? Leaving the current good thing one has, right, for what those potential alternatives are. But the way that that can fluctuate over time, depending on a partner, depending on partner's value, your value, the potential of the alternatives you have, right? That we should expect relationships to end, right? That for those reasons. And so for all the nice side of this, oh, things that are so romantic and love, it's so right. There's a side of it too, I think, that learning in researching in this world, that it's not sad when relationships end, right? That we should predict relationships end, and that successful relationships might be one that lasts a certain amount of time, right? Whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, but for very sort of reasonable reasons, right? That you would expect, oh, that this is no longer the cooperative relationship that it makes sense to be as deeply committed to, right? And that relationship ends, right? And we're very comfortable with that. For the other types of friendships end, we're okay with that. Business relationships end, other types of partnerships. But for romantic relationships, it is a much touchier thing, right? The perceptions of people when they break up, actually breaking up, the effects of that become. But we should expect that people will end relationships, right? And they will, for these different reasons. So
Yeah, we don't really think about like, grief, right? We think, well, grief is a natural part. It should end and there's a function to it. I mean, or at least maybe nowadays, maybe before we were like, you shouldn't feel grief or something. I don't know. But yeah, no, the idea that sort of love, it almost feels like, and I don't know if this is cross-cultural, but it's almost like you're describing that there's sort of love propaganda. And I don't know if that's universal. Like, I don't know if that's a function of you have a market of you need people to sort of like buy your candy bar, and so you got to show them something they're interested in. And what are people interested in? And like violence and mating, because it's opaque, it's difficult to know. You might learn a lesson, horror too, other things. But and so if there's a lot of love propaganda in fiction or literature or what you're exposed to, it's all on these are things that this would make it really great. Like you would predict ahead of time, like what would you make to make people want to watch it? It would be all about how to make it work well. And if it worked well, it would last and be what you want, right? And so I wonder if this sort of like love propaganda gives us a really unrealistic view of what love is, and it sounds like what you're saying is sort of if we took a much more like sophisticated view of it and we think about what its function is, then we might think about it differently and its time course differently.
yeah. And I also think so. There's the love. I like the love propaganda idea. I think that's interesting. And absolutely, and from a very, very young age, right? That is that the idealizing of all of that, right? But then it's also other stuff about our norms, religion, our laws, right? How all of that works, that does the same thing, right? So, certainly, and if you're looking at like Christianity, right? Like a lot of that, right? It's you're getting married and you're together, and it makes that's a biblical thing, right? That's a,
Yeah.
God is saying that's a good thing to do, right? So there's that, on top of it as part of that love propaganda, right?
Yeah.
And then also just if you think about marriage and divorce and other the ways we legally do it, right? It gets complicated once you're intertwined with somebody for those legal reasons, right? And then unintertwining is hard, right? In some cases, depending on how intertwined people have become. And so that scaffolds on top for like, why? Well, no, you just should be together forever, right? Like, because that dissolution process would be really complicated. And often people, some or both people end up losing a lot in the end for doing it. That is very evolutionarily novel, right?
Mm.
The idea of splitting assets and all of these things that have to happen is a lot that I think, it doesn't, I can't imagine how it would have existed for a lot of human evolutionary history, but it does now. And so it's more reasons to why just stay together. Oh, staying together longer is better, and that's the right thing to do and the good thing to do, when that might not, comport with how the psychology is designed.
Yeah. Yeah, the moralization of sex and relationships is just so interesting. And I mean, I suspect, David, it's sort of for, I mean, you alluded to it, David, about sort of the strategic reasons for it, but it's really weird, and certainly has a lot of consequences.
Yeah, I think we too often forget that mating is a zero-sum game and mates are a limited resource, and that if I commit to someone as a mate, that takes me off the mating market, and that could upset a lot of people because I'm such a handsome guy. But I think viewing mating as a zero-sum game, I think can offer a lot of insights and a lot of uncomfortable insights, because I think one of the ways that we play the game is by concealing its zero sum aspects. There's nothing less romantic than saying, "Oh, you are the highest value mate that I can currently get at my current mate value, due to these characteristics." And that is why I'm attracted to you. There's nothing less romantic than putting it in those terms, and yet that is basically what's going on. You're making a calculation about what your value is on the market, what the other partner's value is on the market, what are the potential alternatives, and you're making the best calculation based on the circumstances. But if you were to actually say all that in a relationship, it would torpedo the relationship.
David, here's a
Uh,
new
yeah,
suggestion about a new
yeah,
entrepreneurial idea. You could do Valentine's Day Cards Against Humanity Valentine's cards.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
totally. Cards
not a
Against
good
Love.
idea. Not a yes, exactly. Not a good idea.
No, I mean, I'm thinking about writing a post called "Love is Bullshit" on this stuff.
But I
Maybe releasing it on Valentine's Day.
but I want to poke on David's idea and actually
Yeah,
argue that maybe what Carrie was saying is more right, which is that we
yeah,
had Brooke Shelza on, and it's not
yeah.
like even in a very like polygynous or with a lot of polygyny, is that the right word when it's not gendered, when they're both? Is it
I
polygyny? Polygyny.
believe
There's polygamy, polyandry.
I think
Polygamy, I
the
think, is the broader term, right? And
Okay, polygamy.
yes,
Okay,
that's
good,
the
good.
broader
Okay,
polyandry
term.
are
yeah. Okay,
yeah.
good.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
For some reason, I'm really questioning my like vocabulary today. I don't know. It's okay.
it's confusing.
Yeah, but anyway, even with Brooke Shelza, like I kind of we didn't talk about this, and we haven't posted the episode yet. It's probably going to be coming out soon. We've already talked to her, but it
I look
struck
forward to that.
yeah, it struck me that think, Carrie, like your point about mateships being highly cooperative is actually really key to it, because even in the Himba, with a lot of polygyny, there's still sort of like this keeping it on the DL about who exactly the other partners are. And it really struck me that even though everybody sort of knows that everybody else is doing it and I'm doing it and you're doing it, it struck me that I think a lot of that has to do with it's this common knowledge thing, right? Of sort of like what's my value, and if I am like investing in a partner, but somebody else is sleeping with that partner, but it becomes common knowledge, then that could lower my status or how much investment other people feel like they need to give me, right? And so I think a lot of it has to do with this highly cooperative nature, as you talked about, Carrie, which is that everybody's sort of status of sort of how much cooperation do I deserve? How much esteem do I deserve? How much am I investing in this person? Um, if it becomes common knowledge that sort of all of this stuff is out in the open, then it strikes me that it sort of dissolves precisely because everybody's worried that their market value decreases in the cooperative market. So everybody knows that other people are sort of like, having sex with other people, but why would that be hidden? And I think it has to do with like the signals of investment and how much, like, I might cooperate with you less if I think that other people know that you're not you know being faithful to me in that relationship, right? But if it's sort of opaque, then we all can sort of, it's a stable equilibrium, even though it's sort of, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's, yeah.
In that, I mean, the phenomena at least seems to also happen in like a society like ours, which is, mostly monogamous, right? Or at least on the surface monogamous, right? Where people do have affairs, right? And there is sometimes, oh, kind of maybe knowing, but it's not until it becomes public that that's when the other partner is, okay, now it's a problem, right?
Right.
And it could be for that exact logic that you're describing there, right? Now
Mm.
it's not just that I kind of knew, and maybe other people kind of knew, but now I know that they know, and they know that I know, and we all know, and
Right.
all the common knowledge, right? That
Right.
that
Yeah.
everybody knows that you are investing some over here, and it's not, and then I am over, but I am only, over investing in you, and everybody knows there's this investment differential in our partnership now, right?
Yes.
And what does that say about me now? Right.
Exactly. You can infer the welfare trade-off ratio that you're willing to tolerate if it's common knowledge. So if I don't know, then it's ambiguous. But as soon as I know, and you know that I know, and you're still going along with it, then it's sort of a signal of, yep, this is the level of relationship I'm willing to tolerate. And it's solidified. There was ambiguity before. And so not wanting to know your partner's cheating on you is an example of like not wanting to know, where it would be sort of you're making the best of a bad situation. And you're sort of like, if I don't pursue it, I don't even let my partner know that I know, because I'm not letting them know I'm willing to tolerate it. Right. If I
Mm.
suspect it, but I don't pursue it, then there's sort of plausible deniability that I didn't know, and I still can expect better treatment. But if it becomes common knowledge, then I'm showing I'm willing to put up with worse treatment than they might think otherwise. And that logic applies to third parties too.
Hmm.
Mm. That's really interesting. I mean, that suggests an interesting possibility that to me has not been studied at all, to my knowledge, which is when one partner may intentionally choose not to know if their other partner is cheating,
Yeah.
or actively try to conceal that information and not want it to become common knowledge.
Yeah.
For that very reason, it's better to, know but not know that I know, to
Yeah.
not for it to not be known that I am tolerating this level of exploitation, and that way I can continue, you know, with the status quo, without the reputational costs. That's a really interesting possibility.
And I don't, in one of the papers I have with Dan Conroy Beam, where he's probably the lead author, where we talk about relationship satisfaction. We get at this idea in some way. I'd have to go back and look exactly how, right? But it's this idea, if we're thinking about relationship satisfaction as an adaptation and sort of the function that we lay out, right, is that it's, motivating maintenance behavior, to the extent that this is a fitness, the benefits outweigh the cost, right, for staying in this relationship. That should lead to high satisfaction, and then behaviors that are keeping you in the relationship and keeping the partner, right? Whereas, to the extent that there's information, or an assessment that, leaving this relationship would be better, then you should have lower satisfaction, and that might motivate the leaving, right? And so there's a prediction here, right, that, for the same person, right, this knowledge that your partner's cheating, right? Well, if
Mm.
for all the other reasons, the benefits outweigh the cost of staying, and you don't have other options. Maybe you've got a lot of, vehicles you're investing in, those kids, right? And leaving wouldn't, then you should still feel satisfied, right? But another person, in that same cheating relation, the exact same cheating is going on, right, with a different array of a different landscape, right? Might feel dissatisfaction. And
Yeah.
so we have it in there a little bit with that kind of idea. about, a relationship satisfaction adaptation working in that way.
Mm, that's really interesting. I also, I mean, not to just go slightly darker too. This also happens like in other exploitative or abusive relationships too, right? Where somebody is sort
Hmm.
of like,
Yeah.
if somebody's like doing something terrible to me, there people did this weird thing, right? Where it's sort of like, um, people don't, if it's like if I'm being abused, I don't want other people to know that, which is sort of
Yeah.
weird. And especially from a modern perspective, like people look at that
Yeah.
and they're like, what is that victim doing? And there's sort
Yeah.
of all this narrative that they've internalized their worthlessness or whatever. But this makes a different view of that, which is that there's a calculation in their head that if other people know, I'm worried that they're actually, and I feel like I need to stay in this and I don't have outside options, then it's just my evolved psychology saying I shouldn't let other people know this because I'm actually going to have worse treatment. And
Hmm.
so I actually think like that might not be true in some circumstances, but this actually would predict ways to, if that's true, then you might actually be able to formulate a way of actually getting people to sort of like report themselves being abused at higher rates if you kind of understand the psychology that's otherwise preventing that.
That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense to me. Absolutely. Yeah. And I wonder too, I'm a mating psychology researcher, so I always go to sex differences.
Yeah, no, no, it's great.
Yeah, it's if you look in the intimate partner violence literature, so that's the term, in the literature is IPV, intimate partner violence, and that'll include emotional abuse and physical abuse and those sorts of things, right? You see, higher rates, women reporting it more, and women, I think, actually being, the victims of IPV more than men. But there is this question of reporting, right? The extent,
Hmm.
are there the sex differences in reporting, right?
Hmm.
And some of this, I wonder if there's men, it would be more costly to be perceived as a victim than it would be for women. And so, to the extent that there's greater underreporting from men, that it's because of this sort of argument you're making.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I feel like the topic of strategic ignorance in mating, I think, is really understudied and interesting. Um, I think people would a naive psychologist might frame it in terms of I'm protecting myself from negative feelings or whatever. But I think viewing it in a more functional game theoretic perspective is illuminating. Um, Speaking of which, I know you're thinking about a really interesting topic in mating, which is regret and disappointment, and trying to disentangle what those two terms mean and try to approach it from more of a functional game theoretic perspective than we might have otherwise taken toward those topics. So how are you thinking about regret versus disappointment in the context of mating? In what context might we feel regret about a mating decision versus disappointment, and what even is the difference between those two things?
Yeah. So I'll start a little bit with the difference in like the broader literature that's looked at
Yeah.
regret and disappointment. And what at least has been identified in that broader literature, much of which is not sort of an evolutionary functional perspective, it's at least honed in on the circumstances in which people experience regret versus disappointment and separating the two. And they frame regret as the thing you experience when so both of them are emotions that you experience when you've had to make a decision, right, and pick a path, right, where you didn't necessarily know what the outcome was going to be, right. And regret is what happens when there's the outcome to your decision and it is a worse outcome than what would have happened if you had made a different decision, if you had done something else, right?
Right.
Hmm.
And it might be that you actually know what the outcome would have been if you had done the other thing, right? But it might also be that you're sort of simulating what would have happened if you had done the other thing, or what the possibilities are for what would have happened, because you didn't do that thing, you don't necessarily know what would have happened. But
Yeah.
that certainty can vary depending on what exact decision we're talking about. So
Hmm.
so regret in relationships or in after a sexual encounter or something like that would be something like, well, maybe you chose to have sex with somebody, and the alternative there might have been if you didn't have sex with them, and regret would be experienced if after having sex with them, whatever the outcome is, you're thinking it would have been better. The outcome would have been better if I had not had sex with this person, right? And I'm now experiencing regret. Disappointment is a different discrepancy. So it's the discrepancy between the outcome that happened and what your expectations were about that outcome. So, disappointment would be something more like, okay, I was, thinking of having, casual sex with somebody, right? And I've sort of imagined what this might be like, whether I'm imagining what the actual encounter would be like, or I'm imagining what the consequences would be. Maybe this will be the beginning of a beautiful relationship, right? That, there's things that could happen from this that are great. And then you have sex with this person, and then that the outcome does not live up to those expectations. That's the experience of disappointment. And so you can see how in any given outcome, you could experience both, right? It could be that there's an outcome and it both doesn't live up to expectations. And if you had made a different decision, it would have been better. But you also could uniquely experience one or the other. Regret often comes with disappointment. That one's a little harder to separate, but you can absolutely have disappointment without having regret, right? It could be that an experience doesn't live up to the expectations, but it's not that there's some other outcome that you think would have been better, right, than the outcome you experienced. And so there's this distinction exists in the literature, but again, it hasn't really built into it. What is there involved function here? What are we talking about for these different adaptive problems that might be triggering this? And this matters, right? It could just be that actually it is sort of the same functional program in the mind producing these different things, but we have just picked up on different language for different pieces of it. And so, there's the being careful about, are these different emotions from an evolutionary perspective? But what started me on this is there are studies on regret after casual sex from an evolutionary psychological perspective. And those studies highlight a sex difference, and that tends to be a big focus of those studies. And what they look at for regret after casual sex is sort of two sides of it. There's regret from having had casual sex. So action regret is what they call that. And then there's regret, inaction regret. So regret you might experience because you chose not to have casual sex and wishing that you did. And what they tend to find is that women have greater action regret, right? Regret from casual sexual experiences engaged in than men, and men have greater inaction regret, these missed out experiences. But what I've been wondering in that literature and in that literature and a lot of thinking I'm doing is have we conflated a little bit of regret and disappointment, if they are different things, right, in that literature, and how much of sort of the story of casual sexual regret in women is less a story of regret and maybe more a story of disappointment. And that is some of what I'm trying to figure out now. Working with some students and trying to figure out maybe how to study that. And part of that really is thinking, the EP, first principles, trying to figure out what are the functions here. So I'll stop there. Thoughts?
So disappointment and regret. So you set up nicely what their attributes are. So disappointment is it's different than what I expected. Regret is I should have done something different. And maybe this is obvious, but you mentioned that there hasn't been evolutionary approach yet, and you're doing that. So why do we have these emotions?
Yeah. So, I'll start with disappointment. Disappointment, it seems like your sort of model of the world was wrong, right? Like, because that's what your expectations are, right? And so you experience something that has now given you new information about how the world works, right? Whatever that is, right? And so that needs to be updated, right? And so that experience of disappointment, what seems to go along with it is a little bit of like the stuff that's kind of in the depression world. Like people, they withdraw. They might do some ruminating on it, but it's not that they want to like go back and try again, or that seems to go along with that disappointment path of feeling things. And so my initial thoughts there, it's along those lines, right? Of that's giving you time to really assess like, okay, so that's how the world works, or this is how I need to reevaluate, the landscape, right? And it would be on this, dimension of maybe disappointment to elation, because you could imagine the flip of it where the outcome was much better than your expectations. So still a discrepancy, and your model of the world was still wrong, but it was wrong in the other direction, right? The world works this way. Cool, right?
Yeah.
So there's still an updating, but it's on that this was a beneficial thing, and you were going to
Mm,
miss an opportunity if hadn't didn't realize that the world could work this way, right?
right.
Whereas regret, it's what I've been, wondering. It's a little tough because there's already some good work, I think, on things like shame and these other emotions that the function of those seems to be maybe when we've done a bad thing or guilt, right? But those are all kind of in the social world, like when we've done something that will get us socially devalued or we'll have not valued somebody else well enough. I've been wondering a little bit if really the unique thing about regret is that we've made this decision, there's been an outcome. And at least my like anecdotal experience on this, that first flash of regret, right, is I'm not sure if this was the right decision, right?
Mm,
And I'm actually wondering if there's something there with what real regret is that it's sort of an initial like you have to figure out was this the right decision? Because you either
mm,
didn't have time to know in advance or you couldn't have the information until you did the thing, right?
yeah.
Because the information just wasn't going to be there till you did the thing. And
Mm,
then part of what regret might function to do is to help you figure out, wait, was that the right thing? Was that not the right thing? What were the other things I could have done?
mm,
Talking to people, hey, well, what do you think? Getting that feedback about was I right here, right? Was that the best decision I could have made?
yeah.
And to the extent you get both feedback from simulating all the alternatives or from seeking information or whatever it is, if you get the information back that no, that you made the best decision you could under the circumstance, regret should dissipate, right? But to
Hmm.
the extent you get the information that no, like an alternative would have been better, it might then turn into one of these other emotions, right? So if
Hmm.
I've done something that I'm going to be socially devalued for, regret, and I now realize that that's what it is, right? That regret should transform into shame. If I've done something where I've realized, oh, I've made a decision now that screwed somebody else over that I shouldn't have screwed over, that regret will transform into guilt, right? And so regret might be that thing that to like feed into some of those other emotions, but it's that initial like having to figure out, oh, is that the right thing that I was supposed to do? And that might be that unique thing about regret that hasn't been captured, I think, yet from a functional perspective. And that's the kind of adaptive problem. Like you couldn't have known till you made the decision. And now you have the new information from having made the decision. And maybe you'll seek out some more information. Was it the right decision? And then now deploy other emotions functionally
Mm.
in
I
response.
I love that because it also explains what I've never heard an explanation for is buyer's regret,
Mm.
right? Which is that once you've committed to something like an expensive house or like, marrying somebody, it's this registering of I've committed to a very high cost thing. And Carrie, your description of what the function of regret is, it perfectly explains why that would be, which is that it's not even that you've noticed a problem, it's that just all the percolations of the full weight of the costs, and this is real, and I'm going to buy this house, I'm going to marry this person, all of a sudden there's like this thing of like we feel like we're doing this stupid thing of like just running the counterfactuals of did I make a mistake? And that's actually a really good design per the design you're suggesting, which is it's motivating search for information. Did are Were there better alternatives? And for something like you don't get buyer's regret for like a pack of gum because it's so low cost. But I really like this idea that for high cost things, it's the hallucination, or it's the auto generation of regret simply by virtue of just being so high cost. I like that a lot.
And
Hmm.
I wonder too, with some of these high cost things, I think a lot in evolutionary mismatch terms these days sometimes just because I'm so hyper aware of the world we live in and the people we're studying and our potential counterfactuals for some things now. I mean, they just can be
Yeah.
endless. And I think some of that might be somewhat evolutionarily novel,
Mm.
right? That I'm not choosing between three potential mates. I'm choosing between an endless array of potential mates, right? I mean, I could get lost in running forever. What if I had picked this person, or I had picked this person, or I had picked this person, or I had picked
Mm.
this person, right? And the same with the houses, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm
Yeah.
not
Hmm.
picking between the two potential areas I could have built my house, maybe, right? I don't
Well,
know.
maybe in Santa Barbara, it's just like the EA. It's like this is going to be your house or nothing. Like,
Fair enough.
But no, it's fair. Yeah, yeah, no, totally.
But
Yeah,
I've been fair enough where I am too. We're
yeah.
perpetually have
No,
switching, but
exactly. Not
it's
everywhere. No, no, no. But point taken. Yeah, yeah.
but then I wonder too with the extent to which, I mean, it makes it so we're a wonderful set of people then to try to study this and measure this because we can endlessly counterfactual, right? If you had people for whom
Mm,
there aren't alternatives, right? You would expect no
Mm.
regret if there aren't viable alternatives or very quick regret, right? You'd flash the counterfactual, right? And you'd be like, well, that was the only other option. I'm good, right?
Yeah.
But we are people who for whom that could just you could get caught in that forever, right?
mm.
On certain of these very high cost decisions that we make. And so we might be the
Would
people then to study this stuff
Mm.
in.
would you then predict that you'd see a correlation between mate value and mating regret, such that if I'm a higher mate value person, I have more counterfactual mating opportunities that I could have pursued, whereas and so if I commit to any one of those paths, then there are going to be more potential paths that I could have taken and more potential for me to feel regret. But if I'm a low mate value person, then there's really just like, is this person or nothing? Then I'm much less likely to feel regret in that case because there weren't any other counterfactuals. Maybe I might feel disappointed, but regret is not going to necessarily come into play. Would you make that prediction?
That's I think I might. And that's a
Yeah,
nice one because
yeah,
it's not, on its face, I don't think it's what people would think, right? They'd be like, no,
yeah,
the people who have options shouldn't be regretful, right? But
yeah.
that's precisely what it's predicting. They have so many options, right? That they have
Hmm.
real viable alternatives. And that might be a little bit how I think about it as that part of mate value of your potential alternatives, right? Your alternative options, your alternative choices.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So, David,
Yeah.
like that would be so a strong example of that would be something like you're in a very small scale social world and you commit to a partner, and then you're transported to another social world soon after where there's a lot more options that your evolved psychology is like, oh, this would have been a better person. And so then
Yeah.
you sort of feel regret.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I'm wondering if there may be some kind of interaction between mate value and gender in predicting these gender differences. Um, because I've been reading statistics on like these hookup apps, like men are way more common on these hookup apps than women, and there are just more men competing on the even just the regular dating apps. I think there are just more men just like looking for a mate than women, um, and so it could be that women just have more options just by virtue of being a woman. And that might be contributing to this gender difference in regret, because women just have more sexual options. There are more willing men who are willing to have sex with them, and committing to any one of them is going to lead to more regret because they have more options. But for a man, that might be a different case. So I don't know if you thought about that or if that makes sense to you.
Makes sense to me. And I mean, I think it's also, I mean, I do think there's something there. And this is in the kind of literature on regret about there are probably more costs potentially to women, whatever the outcome, if we're talking casual sex, let's say,
Yeah,
there's potentially, right, more costs for women. And so that also sets it up there when, oh, for men, the costs often are just going to just be low, right?
yeah,
So whatever the alternatives are weren't going to be more costly, right? So
yeah,
so that explains, I think there's something there, certainly. But I think your point also, toggling that too, that would also make sense. That would also fit in that model as well. There's the other piece of it too for women that to the extent that there's any reputational concerns, right, for having engaged in casual sex, right? Um, Whether or not it was actually costly, if it's a casual sexual relationship that didn't turn into a long-term relationship, and
hmm,
this is in your world of sort of the propaganda, right? It might
yeah,
benefit her to say she regretted it, right?
yeah,
Even if, right, to as a signaling to others,
Hmm.
oh, that's not the type of thing that I do or that I like doing, right?
yeah,
And so I've thought about that too with the existing literature on this, right? To this sex difference, right? Is it a difference in what I'm thinking here, this functional side of things, versus a difference in what people will say about their casual sexual experiences that of course I regretted it, right? Oh, right. Yeah. If I'm reporting this some way, I'm going to say that it was because that's not what I do. Right.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
In the same way that, a criminal is incentivized to say that he regrets the crime he committed to the parole board, right? Even if he doesn't actually regret it, he has an incentive to say that he regrets it. And it could be that if women face greater reputational costs for having, short-term casual sex, then they're facing the same incentive as the criminal of, talking to the parole board. They want to say that they really regret it, and they'll be different in the future. And that could be that those kind of social reputational incentives might be driving this as well.
Yeah, and so that's a tough thing in this to try to tease out
Yeah.
for testing some of this, right?
Yeah.
Is that if the adaptation, if I'm arguing, the design of the adaptation as what I sort of described, right? I have to be able to get at that separate from, especially in this realm, how people might be motivated to represent their feelings about the outcome, right?
It's
Uh,
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
You could also make a lot of interesting predictions on the receiver end of the equation. So how do I view someone who feels regret versus
Mhm.
disappointment? So if I'm, evaluating someone as a mate and they regret the casual sex that they had versus they were disappointed in the casual sex they had, what inferences am I likely to draw about that person in either case? It may be that I'm going to be more interested in mating with the person if they feel regret versus disappointment. Maybe disappointment is a bad thing for them to feel because that suggests that they have really high standards that I'm not going to meet.
Mhm.
And so maybe if they felt disappointed about that, maybe that's, more of a cost or more of a downside for me. But if they feel regret, then maybe that's good. Maybe they're motivated to behave differently with me. Um,
Oh,
and so
that's
the type of inferences we draw based on the emotions that people feel is also an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know I mean, certainly I think there's some literature that has us, that gets at what people want to know about past partners, but
Mhm.
I don't know that any of it's gotten at this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And drawing those kind of, your disappointment in, your regret of those relationships and what people are then intuiting from that.
Hmm.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a song lyric, "Love Hurts," right? And I don't know if that's about the breakup. I assume it is. Like, there's a whole, there's this really strong feeling. I mean, I'm almost probabilistically, most people have experienced a romantic breakup, whether it's, dating or marriage or whatever. But I wonder, and I don't know, Carrie, you can tell me if there's work on this, but there's also the question of what is that pain or grief doing? Like from the perspective of like somebody dying, that's sort of it's recalibrating that this person's no longer there. And so all of the sort of settings in me need to be changed that this person isn't there. It's a provoking an opportunity to maybe coordinate with other people about that too. Obviously, because there is love and sexual arousal involved in a romantic relationship, that's all doing this calibrational work. And so when it goes wrong, you have a breakup, it's undoing some of those calibrations. But I also wonder if some of the work it's doing too is also going to affect then like disappointment and regret too, right? In the sense of if you're disappointed because you sort of had too high of expectations. I mean, there's some sense in which a breakup is sort of like the ultimate disappointment. Maybe not regret, but depending, but it's sort of like it's like hyper disappointment in the sense of it's almost leading to this like depressive state where there's recalibration.
Well, and I think when you look in the breakups literature, there's the sudden breakups versus the it's been a long time kind of coming breakups, right? And
Right.
there's, kind of everything in between that, right? And there's sort of different pieces of this, but I had one unpublished master's thesis from a student that where we looked at this idea of sort of the opposite of mate retention behaviors, but mate disengagement behaviors,
Yeah.
right? And it was from this sort of I wasn't quite there with this disappointment idea or anything, but
Mm.
this idea of if you're in a position where you would like to end this relationship, right? Just ending it abruptly, right, is going to be costly for lots of people for lots of reasons. Like it might benefit you because you get out of it sooner, but there's costs. The people who do the breakup are seen as worse. So there's
Hmm.
kind of data on that. And then you also have this person that you might have shared investments with and that you do care about, right? That like it will cause this extra harm and cost to, right? If it is sudden. And so there might
Mm,
be some, behaviors that you do, things you do to slowly ramp down. So instead of the ramping up but it's that slowly ramping it down so that when
mm,
that dissolution happens, it's not as
Mm,
much of a recalibration they're going to have to do, right? It's already been that things have become disentangled, right?
mm,
Um, and versus the ones where it comes out of nowhere, right? That's when I would expect
mm,
that depression, those things to happen, because you're right, somebody is going from, I thought we were highly intertwined here, but now I'm not, versus there
mm,
was that dialing down of everything before that separation. Yeah.
mm,
interesting. Yeah. I mean, it seems like, anger might come into play as well, where if you're, breaking up with someone out of the blue or ghosting them or whatever, it's almost kind of like they're not treating you fairly or properly, that they're not respecting you adequately, or treating you with a welfare trade-off ratio that is sensitive to your needs. So if I'm, leading you on and then totally blowing you off, I'm imposing a cost on you for a really low benefit to me. Like maybe I learned that, you're not for me and that's the benefit I get. It's a pretty small benefit, but it's a huge cost on you for me to get that small benefit. And that might trigger the anger system as well.
That would make sense. Yeah. And I think it's pretty consistent there. I think with the literature I do know on breakups, anger is one of the things that certainly the people who are dumped, right,
You
absolutely feel. And this is how I would expect it to toggle though, right? That to the extent that there had been ramping down, right? Although I don't know, because it still might be, you're not, that WTR signaling is still that you aren't valuing me the way that I thought I should have been valued. But yeah, and then the guilt on the side of the breaker upper, right?
yeah. Yeah.
How much that is them, to the extent that I would imagine that if they've done these ramping things down, they should feel less guilty than if
Yeah.
they cut it off, right? Really, out of nowhere for this other person.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, the challenge of breaking up with someone is a pretty huge adaptive challenge, that there are a lot of different strategies you could take, and just that as a topic I think is really understudied. But it seems like a really fraught situation that can be really risky. Like if you do a poor job of breaking up with someone, you could like make an enemy, and that's really bad for you to have an enemy in your social world, especially if they could turn other people against you, if it damages your reputation, if they come after you, either verbally or physically or whatever. It's a really fraught situation to break up with someone, and handling that well, I think would have plausibly been a selection pressure. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, Karen Perilou has a paper from, I don't know, 2010-ish. I don't know. But
Yeah,
that is about, some of this stuff, how people perceive the person who does the breaking up versus the person who's broken up with. And it talks about these different costs to being the dumper, right? And doing,
yeah,
and
especially if
yeah,
you're yeah. Especially if your
well,
social networks are intertwined with the person you're breaking up with, that could have huge social ramifications if you do a poor job of ending that relationship.
the social networks, the
Yeah,
kin networks,
yeah,
right? Depending on
hmm
how that's worked, right? And how
yeah,
long you've been together and how intertwined all of that is, right?
yeah.
The ramifications could be quite costly. And so that, that was, well, again, in this unpublished master's thesis that maybe at some point it will see the light of day, but this is sort of what we were looking at, right? Was these different potential strategies and tactics that people might have to do this breaking up, right? And some of it was, the withdrawing of investment. But some of it was also like doing things to make yourself seem like less of a good partner to be with. Like, so
Hmm.
that they wouldn't, right? It's like, oh, if I'm no longer representing my, like, if I'm now schlubby and like I wouldn't be somebody you want to be with, right? Then you are you're less
mm,
interested, right? And I could
Hmm.
functionally do that, right? And then some of it was, inflicting costs on the partner, things like that. So there
Right.
was the different sort of categories we had of these potential ways to disentangle yourself. And we did find that they were the use of those was associated with relationship satisfaction. So people who were lower in relationship satisfaction were doing more of those things. And that was sort of consistent with our idea that this might be this mate ejection sort of strategies that were happening.
Right. It's almost like, withdrawing from the relationship abruptly is imposing a huge cost on you. But if I make the relationship itself undesirable for you, then it's no longer a cost to you. It's actually a benefit for you
Hmm.
to leave the relationship. So you're transforming something that would have otherwise been really anger inducing into something that, might be sad or disappointing, but not necessarily anger inducing because it's no longer a cost for or as big of a cost for them to end the relationship if you yourself are a less desirable partner. That's interesting. I
Yeah,
mean, and
that's
it could be, it may explain some of these like fights between couples that aren't really about anything, you know, like, if I'm, dissatisfied with the relationship, I want to ramp it down. I might just be more, grumpy and annoying and like pick fights about the dishes or whatever, just to make the relationship more unpleasant, as a way of kind of ramping down. And it could be that these kind of fights about mundane, irrelevant things are really not about the irrelevant thing itself, but about, some deeper dissatisfaction with the relationship.
Yeah, and if you do it well enough, you get them to break up with you, and then
Yeah.
they experience the costs of being the dumper.
Yeah.
And when
Hmm.
that was, what the underlying goal was the whole time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Really interesting.
Yeah. There's also this thing about breakups. It reminds me of sort of like adolescence too, where there's like all this thing with even prior to like any relationship, there's sort of like who are you dating and who broke up with who. It's almost
Hmm.
like practice for these social costs of who likes who, what are the social costs and benefits of that being common knowledge, who broke up with who. And some of it is like hallucinated, right? Where like, the trope is
Yeah.
sort of the girls, especially like the guys don't even know. And they're like, oh, well, no, you sat next to me. So we were, and now you're not going to talk to me. And it's like the girls talking to the girls, like doing their, three-dimensional social chess. And the guys are like, playing yo-yo. I mean, but that's sort of a trope. And I don't know if there's been research on that.
My middle school flashbacks. Well, I was going to say for the, some of this lifespan mating idea, I think, for ethical reasons, we start at 18 often.
Yeah.
But and there have been some studies that have looked at a little bit of sort of like attraction and these things in people under the age of 18, but for very reasonable ethical reasons, we right, we start at 18, but we're missing out, I think, on a lot of this, right? How much of that is sort of practice for later? How much of that is establishing some of these things like social value or mate value or these sorts of things early on, right?
Right.
And how to navigate that. And yeah, why is it so insane in seventh grade, right? Why does that seem to reach a peak that
Yeah.
of exactly what you're talking about, right? Oh, they sat next to who and they're on, right? And all that. I think it's to me, I think a good some good evolutionary work on that would be really interesting. It's the challenge though of studying some of those things in children, right?
Yeah.
But it's cool questions. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I mean, just even aside from I mean, I'm not sure how much of that is even sexual. Like a lot of it is just sort of fictive. Like again,
Right.
it's almost like the play. But there's this other part too, when you're talking about regret and disappointment. We are all parents here. Like this is also a problem for kids. Like kids are disappointed all the time. And it makes complete sense. Like it follows from this idea that like you don't know what the world is like. So like this thing of like this wild emotions of like elation or disappointment, it makes sense that kids especially are feeling these a lot
Yeah.
precisely because you don't know what the world is like.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and it's so that's such a great point. My daughter's 2.5, right? So
Mm.
we're yes, yeah, the
Yeah.
emotions all the time.
Yeah.
But I'll think about times where she is very upset about something because we didn't do this thing the same way we did it the last time. And it's really because her expectations have been set by that one instance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, as those priors are being built, right? That
Yeah.
was the one. And so
Yeah.
it is all hinged on when we do this thing, we do it this way.
Yeah.
And when we don't do it that way, right? I mean, it's so not been met. And
Yeah.
because she doesn't have the wealth of experiences to toggle the expectation of what happens when we leave the house and go to the store, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that one we've done a lot, but like you could think of others where
Yeah.
it's we've done it once or a few times, and really that expectation is set by that one thing, and that's what they say is, well, we didn't do it this way. We had to do it this way.
Yeah.
And we might not have even realized as parents that that was part of what we did that time, right?
Yeah.
But that really in their mind that they hooked onto that as the thing that happens when we do this that they liked for some reason, right? Or at least they just expected it, right? They
Yeah.
just expected it to be that way because that's what they expected. And then this outcome we didn't match that expectation, right? And then yeah. Or the flip side, when you do something that they find hilarious because and they didn't know where that was going to come from, and
Yeah.
then they're just giddy with excitement.
Yeah. They're like, I didn't know the world had ice cream and it's incredible. Like it's just, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, my daughter had the first bite of a cake pop yesterday.
Yeah.
That was it got real wild.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like I did not know the world included this. That also suggests that, I mean, I don't know what the developmental research on disappointment is. And I should look into this, but it strikes me that like a very humane area of research, if there's not a lot, would be this, because I mean, if there are these humans that are constantly disappointed or possibly like have these expectations that are really volatile because they're so inexperienced and lack this common sense knowledge that we take for granted as adults, like I think that would be really important to know. It's also important for parents to understand, just remember like they don't have the same expectations. So I'd imagine a lot of kids crying, that's the disappointment machine right there.
Right. Well, and at least the sort of parenting advice you see about routines. I mean,
Right.
this helps explain why that
Yeah.
is so
Yeah.
important to them
Right.
because then it matches their expectations of what's going to happen once you've established routines. Then they know this is, and you'll have less of that volatility because you're not constantly doing things outside of an expected pattern.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
In your work on looking at these emotions, are there like any, because David talked a little bit about like status or people's mate value. Are there like individual differences in how people are prone to like being regretful or
Ooh.
disappointed?
I mean, so there's some that they've looked at. The broader literature, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
At least within the EP stuff on like casual sexual regret, they've looked at different, predictors, right? So like, like religiosity and things like that, where, they're more regretful of casual sex, and you can fit that into a framework of there's potentially more costs, right?
Yeah.
Social
Mhm.
costs there. Sociosexual orientation, right? So if people are more inclined to casual sex, they regret casual sex less. That makes sense. So there's some of those within that literature. I don't know the broader literature though on the
Yeah.
individual differences side of it.
Yeah. Yeah, just anecdotally,
That's
it seems
interesting.
like now that we're talking about it, there's people I know who are more regret prone than others. They'll make a decision and it's like, oh, it must have been, it was a horrible decision. And some people just are like, whatever, and it would be interesting to sort of unpack why that would be.
Yeah, I mean, I had in my all my notes and my thinking on this, I've got a prediction that is a little bit about um, to the extent that if you're more intelligent or you could simulate more
Hmm.
counterfactuals, right?
Yeah.
I would
Mm.
expect you to have more regret, right?
Hmm.
Oh,
If
yeah.
or
Yeah.
if you're more imaginative or
Yeah.
creative, I think I've
Yeah.
written it like
Yes.
that five
Yes.
different ways, like
Yes.
because yeah, you could sit there and you could all day long
Yeah.
think of all the different things
Yeah.
you could have done versus somebody who can't do that as well, right? I
Mm.
should be
Hmm.
less regretful, right? So I had
Yes.
that idea in there. I
That's a
haven't
great idea. Yeah, the counterfactual thing is the miserable counterfactual thinker. Like I think we're all good counterfactual thinkers. That's what makes us good evolutionary psychologists. But yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Constantly imagining all the ways things could be better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm,
That's
mhm.
the curse.
Well, and you might get
Yeah.
the a combination there of being that creative or imaginative or whatever it is, but then also if you are less likely to want to discuss that with others for some reason, right? If that's like an
Mhm.
individual difference dimension, you're more
Mm.
introverted about it, or you don't, right?
Yeah.
Then it's just worse because you're just in your mind and you don't get the feedback from anybody saying that's silly, that never would have happened. That counterfactual you suggested is just really improbable. Don't worry about that, right?
Mm.
But if
Yeah.
you kept it all in there, right? Then it's just you in your mind forever.
Yeah.
Right. It's
That would,
it could go the other way though, because you could be using your counterfactual reasoning to simulate how worse things could have been, and maybe you're imagining all the worst case scenarios and all the ways that the world could be more dangerous and awful than you thought. And so in some cases, maybe it would lead to the opposite. You're happy with your decision because you're not running, from the monster in terror. All the horrible things that could have happened didn't, so you're happier. So that would probably be a moderating variable as well. Like, what kinds of counterfactual scenarios are you likely to entertain? If you're constantly imagining happy counterfactual scenarios, that could paradoxically make you feel worse. And if you're, imagining the worst case scenarios, that could paradoxically make you feel better.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
that's
is.
interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no,
Yeah.
go ahead, Carrie. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was going to say when I've thought about that regret dimension, most of the literature on it is just regret to like no regret, like you don't experience, but it seems like relief. If there's a dimension like the disappointment
Mm,
elation, right? It's like
yeah.
regret to relief. And if you're doing that imagining of like, yeah, man, if I had done that, yeah, done the other thing, that would have been terrible. That it's relief might be the other anchor on that dimension.
Yeah. This
Mm,
also, there was a study done where I think it was like British Subways. Don't quote me on the specifics, but they removed the advertisements from the subway, and it was a very subtle manipulation, but they actually like found that people's well-being slightly ticked up from removing the advertisements, because I mean, like one of the like the tropes of advertising is it's creating unmet wants, like that's kind of the job of advertising, right? Is to sort of make you feel like a discrepancy between your current state and the desired state. That's what motivates you to do something. Um, and this comes back to this like relationship propaganda then, where I wonder if this point of, if you're positively always evaluating something, it's going to make you feel worse about your own situation. If you're comparing counterfactuals that are worse than yours, then you're going to feel better. So this actually suggests that if people are constantly consuming sort of like worse relationship material, they're going to feel better about their relationship. But if they're consuming more positive, they're going to feel worse about it too. Yeah.
That prediction totally makes sense. Yeah. And I will say as in my one source that people, I think in my research world all the time, they're like, go look at like one of the relationship subreddits and just see what people are saying about this, right? And those are
yeah.
great sources for like situations where you're like, man, my situation's fantastic.
Yeah.
Let me read about this.
It's really, yeah.
It'd be a great couples therapy strategy. Just like go on our relationships,
Yeah.
read the horror stories.
Like, stop arguing about the dishwasher. Just read
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the what it is, like people feel happier when they volunteer and work with like people who are worse off than them. It's like they should just do couples therapy where they just do the therapy for couples who are worse off than them. Yeah.
Wow. We're going to pair you with this
Yeah,
couple.
exactly. Although it only works half for half of the people, because the other, well,
Yeah.
it depends. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. The poor couple that you use as the
No, exactly.
as the comparison.
This is
Exactly.
where we just get
Yeah.
actors in,
No,
right? It's
Yeah.
exactly.
actors,
No,
There
they're
you
that's a
go.
great
Confederates, they're
idea. Wow,
whatever,
this thing
right?
writes itself. This is like a reality TV. Well, actually, I wonder, some of reality TV, like, might be this too, right? It's just consuming.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's lots of sort of psychological sugar, quote unquote, in that reality TV. But I wonder if like seeing worse relationships also just sort of is like, oh, okay, that drama, I can turn it off and I don't have that drama.
Yeah. It's interesting the drawing to it, right? Because you look in the popular cultural representations of things. There's the world of romance novels and Hallmark movies and all those things that are the very positive side of it that people seem to be drawn to. But then exactly what you're saying, there's the reality TV version of the where there's that drama and the dysfunction, and people are equally or more, I'm not sure, right, drawn
Mm.
to watching that. Both seem to attract, right, the attention. I don't know if one more than the other, but both of them are represented, I think.
Yeah, and if you look like even classic literature, I mean, a lot of it has the negative too, Like, I mean, nowadays it's sort of like it's seen as lowbrow to have the sort of really negative part, but I think like it's always sort of been there.
Hmm. All of Jane Austen.
Yeah,
It's a journey to get to the end there.
yes, yeah. Um, this intersection of mating and emotions, is this a relatively new thing? I mean, it seems so obvious, but is this sort of new?
I think it is sort of new. I think in when thinking about emotions in the mating world before, people talked about love,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And attraction, arousal, right? That those ideas
Hmm.
came up. Jealousy, certainly.
Mm.
But jealousy was probably the only one that I think was sort of well worked from that adaptive
Hmm.
problem perspective, really thinking about the design and design features and coming from that. But it is not something that there had been a ton of. And for what is there, I think it's not quite nuanced yet, right? It isn't sort of really, I think there's been a lot of fantastic work on emotions that has happened in the last, 15 or so years from, an EP perspective about really how to do really good research, thinking about what emotions are, right? And, what the adaptive problem is and what the design, of that emotion would look like if it did evolve to solve that adaptive problem, right? And then how do you study that, right? How do you design studies to really demonstrate evidence for those hypothesized design features? I think in, some of these emotions we've talked about with, anger and shame and these ones where people have really developed these beautiful research programs. And I think that's one thing I'm really interested in for the, sort of the future of mating research is taking some of that
Mm.
either for those emotions or these other emotions that really are relevant in a mating context and building out research programs in the same way with those same principles, I think is absolutely a cool next step for good stuff and some low hanging fruit for graduate students or people thinking about developing theses and right. I mean, I think there's good stuff to be done there.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. And it's also, there's a lot of these emotions are very positive and negative. I mean, it seems sort of trite to say, but like a lot of human experience is run up in these emotions. And it's a very humane thing to sort of respect understanding them. And it's sort of weird how much, and I think for the strategic reasons we've avoided them, but it's very inhumane in the same way it was sort of inhumane to worry about, like, they didn't give kids what is it called? I can't think of any words today. What is it called when you like give people like they can't feel pain? Anesthetic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like they didn't give like
Oh,
babies anesthetic for just because like the doctors weren't even like thinking about kids like, oh, whatever, kids don't feel things. And so, you know, it's very inhumane to not think about the evolved design of all of life. And I think like to the extent that psychology has been sort of high and mighty about biological things like mating, it's also missed out on like addressing what is a fairly, if we don't have a science of it, we can be pretty inhumane about like people's needs and their feelings about like, am I attached to somebody? Do I feel secure? Do I feel loved? Um, it's weird that we don't have a better science of that. And I think it's a real problem to sort of be ignoring it scientifically. And it's really sad in a way.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine any emotion that is not relevant to mating. It's sort of the domain where all of our emotions apply. Yeah, like I can't really think of an ex I mean, maybe I don't know, even hunger. Like, you eat with your mate and you prepare food with your mate, and you can be hangry if the dinner's not ready
the
or whatever.
perpetual discussion of where are we going to have dinner tonight? And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Like that's a huge part of relationships. If you don't like the other person's cooking, or who they're cooking more than you, or vice versa, like lots of stuff. Like I can't think of any emotion that isn't relevant. I mean, it's if you think about it, it's the central adaptive challenge of being an organism is to reproduce, and a mateship is the context where that happens. It seems like all of our emotions should be relevant to that thing.
Mhm.
And so I think it's a really interesting and useful direction to take it where, what are all these other emotions? What are ways in which we're afraid or guilty or ashamed or proud or embarrassed or whatever in the context of a relationship? And it seems like all of those things, happen to varying degrees in a romantic relationship. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And also there's the ones that are going to be unique to that,
hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
people talk about sexual arousal, that kind of thing, but also, parental love, right?
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
and that sort of family unit being created, right? And the psychology regulating that and those feelings towards that little genetic vehicle that's terrorizing you, but you also love so much,
Yeah.
right? That all of that only, right? comes online or happens, right? In those mateships, right? So I think it's you're absolutely right. It's all of the things plus, right? Ones that you
Yeah.
couldn't study in another another type of relationship, but really matter for that type of relationship.
This is really interesting because we started this conversation saying there's too much mating work, but we're actually arriving at there's not enough. And or
Hmm.
precisely what it is that the way we've compartmentalized mating and the approach we've
Hmm.
taken to it has been it's really its own little thing.
Yeah.
And what we're landing on is that actually it should be everywhere and
Yeah.
diffused throughout. So it's really just that there should be more but different, right? And just sort of integrated with everything. Yeah.
I like that. More but different, but integrated with everything.
Put that
And
on a stick.
it's you're absolutely right. It's what brings me back to still, right? I mean, I'm tenured. I'm I've got my job. I could switch, right? I could
Yeah.
say I'm not doing any more mating research. I'm going to deep dive in something else in EP and I'm going to make that my thing instead, right? Like
Yeah.
I do, I'm very, very fortunate. I have the freedom I could choose to do that if I wanted to. But somehow it just I just keep coming back to it, right? I just the questions that I come up with and building on what I've already done or thinking through end up, and it's for this reason, right? I think about what can we be doing better and what are the next things we should be learning and how should we be advancing our science in this world. But yeah, for all the ways in which it's dominated the conversation about EP in some spaces, right? It's for good reason. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because it is sort of, yeah, I'm not a mating person, but I also, I mean, I'm colleagues with Dan. I see him all the time. And I feel like the thing of sort of like apologetically, I'm a mating researcher, right? It like kind of comes up a little bit, but it sounds like, again, we're coming kind of full circle where it's sort of like to not only not be apologetic about it, but to sort of say, yeah, I'm a mating researcher and this is why it's awesome and important. And here's the way to do it.
Yes.
I like that. Carrie, is there anything that we should have asked you?
I don't think so. That was good conversation. I enjoyed
Yeah,
that. We hit
yeah.
on lots of good topics. So yeah.
Did you want to talk any more about cooperation? Because you said you've been thinking a lot about like cooperation in that relationship. Is there anything about that that we hadn't hit on that you've been thinking about?
We mostly hit on it. I think the only other piece. Oh, I recently reread the Banker's Paradox paper
Mm,
about irreplaceability, right?
Hmm.
And so it was just another piece in that puzzle of when we're thinking about these mating relationships, right? Like a bunch of this logic applies, right,
Yeah.
from other cooperative relationships. And so that was a piece there from that literature on friendships, right?
Yeah.
That in best friends and close friends and it's that irreplaceability that and being irreplaceable and a lot of that logic the same predictions, right, apply and like how to, attract a good partner, right, a romantic partner, right? And so I think some of it is in thinking in a nuanced way about mating as its own thing is some of that defining like, well, how is it, it is the extreme cooperative relationship, but then what are the features that make it extreme or unique or different, right? And then how does that change your predictions from what you would predict from different cooperative relationships? Or
mm,
are you just going to predict the same thing,
I
right?
see.
But it's just the same thing with even higher consequences, right?
Right.
And I think some of that thinking, I think, really helps explain what goes on in mateships more as like fitting on that cooperative relationships continuum necessarily than like its own domain, its own separate thing.
Mm. So like
And
just to make it concrete to see if I'm understanding. So like an example might be like one thing that's unique about mating, unlike another cooperative relationship, is it can create children, right?
yep.
And so, like, so one idea would be that sort of one of the Q structures of a relationship would just be like, do we have children together or not? And that would just have consequences on sort of settings. Is that the kind of,
Yes, that kind of thing. And then once you have children, right, the consequences that, the well-being of those children and all those things have, I mean, that's an additional that might sort of trump some of these other considerations
right?
that in a cooperative relationship where that's not part of your shared investments, right? That it, these other things can matter more or matter in different ways that once there are those kids there, right? I mean, that swamps could swamp a lot, right?
Yeah,
And so so it's the even before, but then, once they're
yeah,
there, that might really influence things. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, research is me search, but one of the themes of this podcast is there's not enough work on parenting psychology.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course it's, it's something that like I think I acknowledged before I had a kid, but then like once I had a kid, I was like,
Right.
oh yeah, no, there's not enough.
Yeah,
Like
no,
it
totally.
just really and I think sometimes people ask, especially they ask mating researchers this all the time, about like, oh, since you know all this, like, aren't you a really great mater? Like, don't you apply it, right?
Yeah,
So you can find a really great mates or you can whatever, like, the amount we have conscious access to it, the amount you in a moment can do any of that, right? I don't really think so, but I have found much more with parenting
mm,
in those moments of like thinking exactly like this, like, you are losing your shit right now, little kid. Oh, like this is how disappointment works in you,
yeah, no, no,
right?
exactly.
Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it feeling, I think a lot of the parenting angst people feel about, oh, my child is, it's, oh, I've made them sad, or oh, and I'm not feeling guilty about it, right? I a little bit don't, I mean, maybe this is me being a bad parent, but I more am like, no, like you're this little being, your evolved psychology is calibrating and it's
yeah,
doing this, and that's
yeah,
good. And of course, by making sure you're safe and you're fed and we're strongly attached and all that, but like, I just want your little evolved psychology to like figure these things out and calibrate the world in this way, right? And I think that I
yeah.
think I've been more conscious of that, like in the parenting realm than I ever was in like, or am in like the mating realm. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
David, I don't know how you feel about that, but I feel that same way too. Of sort of maybe it's also knowing the cross-cultural literature where I sort of much more emphasis on autonomy
Mhm.
than sort of like the ambient norms here, at least of sort of like the really helicopter, like I have to move their limbs for them. It's like no, no, no. In like a hunter-gatherer, hunter-forder, like for evolved history, kids were basically, I mean, not on their own, but you get much more so, right? And so that
Yeah.
sense of like you respect that they're an evolved creature, like you said, Carrie, and they're doing their own thing.
They are. Yeah. I think every time I talk to anthropologists about, which is one of my favorite things to talk to them, they can just tell me about it. I don't need to go.
Exactly. It's the win-win. It's the
Right.
they do the dangerous, sweaty, oh my God, the
The
anecdotes.
stories,
I
I don't
know.
know, the things, but so many of them I've heard them refer to like the bands of roving children, right?
Yes.
Like the kids just roam in the packs, right? And it'll be from the time they
Yeah.
can keep up with the pack, they're with the pack, and then they're right, and they're just autonomously doing these things. There's eyes on the little ones to, hopefully make sure they don't fall off the cliff or whatever, right? But and that I agree that in thinking about that version of childhood versus for reasons our child, the version of childhood for our children is different, and there's lots of great things about that, but it really influences, I think, also some of my concerns that I don't have, right,
Yeah.
about what I need to be doing as a parent that I think I wouldn't have if I wouldn't be able to think of it that way if I weren't an evolutionary psychologist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Well, we did not. I am not at all regretting or disappointed by this conversation.
No. Yeah, I feel the opposite. What is the opposite of regret? Is there
I
an
think
opposite?
relief is what I would put on the other end. I don't know that I'm
Relief?
relieved.
You
I
said
don't know.
elation. It was you said elation too. Is
So
that
yeah,
disappointment?
disappointment,
Sorry.
elation is
Okay.
sort of in the literature on like the other end. If when you see people talk about something on the other end, it's like disappointment versus elation. Regret, they just talk about like regret or no regret. But I sort of think relief might be the other side of it. Like
Relief.
if
Or
you
what about
realize
just being glad? Oh, sorry to
Just
interrupt, but
being,
yeah.
like the opposite, like if you had done the other thing, it would have been much worse. Oh, I'm really glad.
yeah.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see. So yeah.
Right?
Oh, I see. See. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Or even just like it wouldn't have been like a catastrophe if I did the other thing, but the thing I did was like is really good, and I really made the right choice, and I'm really glad I made that choice. I don't know if we even have a word for that.
It's like
No. Well,
satisfaction.
Yeah.
satisfaction, maybe? I don't know. Well, whatever that word is, I'm feeling it. This was a
Rolling
very fun
Stones.
conversation.
Yeah.
This is a great conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Carrie, for being with us. We have to get some, maybe we should get have a Valentine's Day special about love or something. We can unpack love more.
Oh yeah, get a
Mhm.
panel of us, right? And we
Exactly. No, this
all,
is the thing. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that'd be
Yeah.
fun.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I hope everybody has a non-disappointing week.
With no regrets and lots of love.
Oh. David, I have no regrets about this episode.
Me neither. In fact, I was the opposite of disappointed. I was elated by this fun conversation. And if you're feeling elated by what you've just heard, what can you do, Dave?
You can check out Cari Goetz's work. You
Hmm.
can leave us a kind review. You can pay us a visit on Patreon and leave a few coins here or there.
Hmm.
And yeah, you can just generally support the podcast. And I don't know anything else. Did I leave anything out?
Talk about us on social media. Recommend
Oh,
us
that's right.
to a
Social
friend.
media. Yeah.
Yeah, your enthusiasm and support is the fuel that keeps us going. So if you like what you're hearing and you want this to keep going, please give us the support we need.
And recommend guests.
Yeah, that too. Reach out to us if you have ideas for episodes or guests. Let us know. We're very open to suggestions.
I would have loved to have Charles Darwin on this podcast, just
Oh,
for the
that would have been
record.
amazing. Maybe we should get like an AI simulation of Charles Darwin and interview him.
Can you do that?
I mean, I think. I mean, they did it with George Carlin. They had a whole AI
Oh, I didn't know about
stand-up
that.
special of George Carlin.
Mm.
The title is actually hilarious. The title was "I'm Glad I'm Dead,"
That's pretty
which
good.
is
I mean,
honestly like
that's pretty
he.
George Carlin. I mean, that's
Yeah,
Carlin-esque. I think
yeah,
that's. I'm glad I'm dead. Actually, that is exactly what he would say. Yeah.
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 It is. So that was
Well,
pretty impressive.
all right. Well, yeah. If you, all right. Well, we'll revisit that for later. Okay. So maybe we'll have Charles Darwin on.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe if
Exclusive,
AI keeps
exclusive,
advancing, maybe it'll
exclusive.
happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
before the takeover. Did
yeah.
you post the thing AI doomerism is bullshit? Did you?
Yeah, it's on my yeah. If you want to read about how AI is not going to kill us
Mm,
all, I have a
yeah.
post called "AI Doomerism is Bullshit."
You should read
Uh,
it before AI kills us all.
yeah, that would be good, just to prepare yourself for
Yeah,
for what is not going to happen.
I can just imagine a shot of like somebody's screen as like a Terminator like foot is like crashing on the screen that's like it pins up. I hope if somebody is listening in Hollywood, please make that happen. It'd make an AI movie and have David's uh
That would be great.
that would
That would be wonderful. Honestly, that would be better. I feel like if I'm going to be wrong, I would love to be wrong in such a spectacular way.
exactly. If you're gonna do something, do it in a spectacular way, and that includes
Yeah,
being wrong. Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Well, on that note, enjoy your week, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. See you next week.